Unseen footage is now bringing out tragic details about Elvis Presley, revealing moments that were hidden from the public for years. It shows a deeper look into his life beyond the spotlight. What really happened behind closed doors? Why are these details only coming out now? Join us as we explore this emotional and surprising story. The man behind the crown. There was something about Elvis Presley that people rarely talked about. Not the voice, not the hips, not the way an entire arena could fall silent the moment he walked on stage. What people rarely talked about was how kind he was. Not kind in the way famous people pretend to be. Kind in the quiet, private way that leaves no trace. No audience, no camera, no reason. The people who knew him up close, the ones who saw him without the costume and the lights, would tell you the same thing. He was a man who remembered your name. Who asked about your mother? Who would stop in the middle of a busy afternoon just because someone looked like they were carrying something heavy inside? He had grown up with nothing. A small house in Tupelo, Mississippi. A family that struggled. A boy who had to learn very early that the world does not hand you anything. And yet, when the world gave him everything, the money, the fame, the adoration of millions, he never seemed to forget where he came from. That gentleness stayed with him. It was the most real thing about him. But gentleness on its own is not enough to survive what Elvis Presley was asked to survive. The night it all began to unravel was not a dramatic one. There was no storm, no argument, no single moment that anyone could point to and say, that is where it changed. It was quieter than that. The kind of quiet that settles into a room and makes everything feel slightly off, like a painting hung just a fraction too low on the wall. People who were there that night would later say the air felt heavy, that something was moving beneath the surface of things, slow and invisible, the way water shifts beneath ice before the crack appears. There were small signs, a pause that lasted a beat too long, eyes that seemed to be looking just past whoever was speaking to him, a stillness that did not feel like peace. Nobody said anything. That was the thing. Nobody said anything because nobody had the words for what they were seeing, or perhaps because they did not want to believe what the words would mean. To understand what was happening to Elvis in those final years, you have to understand what his life had become. By the time his name was known in every country on earth, the machine around him had grown enormous. There were managers and handlers and schedules packed so tight, there was no room left to breathe. There were shows, hundreds of them, each one demanding that he be larger than life, that he fill a room with something superhuman, that he leave every single person in that audience feeling like they had witnessed something they would never forget. And he did. Every time he did. But no one asked what it cost him. The applause is a strange thing. It lifts you so high that you begin to forget what solid ground feels like. And when the noise finally stops, when the last fan has gone home and the lights have been turned off and the building empties out, you are left standing alone in the silence. And the silence is louder than anything. Elvis Presley knew that silence well. He had been living inside it for years. Graceland was supposed to be home, and in many ways it was. The place where he could take off the costume, where the people around him were people he had chosen, where the rules were his own. He filled it with things that made him happy. He kept his loved ones close. He was generous in a way that sometimes embarrassed the people receiving his generosity, because it came with no strings attached, and people were not used to that. But even inside those gates, something was changing. The footage from those years, the private footage, the kind not meant for public eyes, tells a different story than the one most people knew. It shows a man who laughed less easily than he once had, who sometimes sat alone in a room full of people, who could be in the middle of a conversation and suddenly go somewhere else entirely, somewhere inside himself that no one else could follow. He slept at strange hours. He moved through his days in patterns that had slowly, quietly shifted from what they used to be. The people closest to him noticed. Of course they noticed. But noticing and knowing what to do with what you've noticed are two very different things. The signs had been there for a while before anyone put them together. A change in energy. Not the dramatic kind, not a collapse. Just a dulling of something that used to burn bright. A change in routine. Meals at odd times or skipped entirely. Sleep that came too much or not enough. A growing distance between the man and the world around him, as though he was slowly pulling back from a window that he used to stand at and look through with curiosity and joy. Those who loved him watched and worried, but said little. partly because he was Elvis, and you did not easily sit down with Elvis Presley and tell him you were frightened for him. Partly because the changes were subtle enough that each one on its own could be explained away. A bad week, exhaustion, the weight of a schedule that would have broken most people years ago. And partly, if we are being honest, because no one wanted to be the one to say out loud that something was deeply, seriously wrong. Because saying it would make it real, and making it real would mean having to face what came next. So the sign sat there, quiet and patient, in plain sight, waiting. "I don't always show what I'm feeling," he had once told someone close to him, in a moment of rare openness. "But that doesn't mean I'm not feeling it." He was feeling all of it, every bit of it, and the weight of it was heavier than anyone around him fully understood. That was the tragedy beginning to take shape. Not with noise, not with warning, but slowly, the way the sky darkens before a storm. So gradually that by the time you look up and think of reaching for a coat, the rain is already falling. The weight of a name. There is a particular kind of trap that fame builds for certain people. It does not announce itself. It does not arrive all at once. It builds slowly, brick by brick, out of the very things that look like success from the outside. The packed arenas, the sold-out tours, the name on every radio, the face on every magazine. And by the time the walls are high enough to matter, the person inside has usually stopped remembering what freedom felt like. That was where Elvis found himself. The demands were relentless, not occasional or seasonal, relentless in the way a river is relentless, always moving, never resting, wearing down whatever is in its path through sheer persistence rather than force. There were shows to perform, contracts to honor, people to satisfy, expectations to meet that had been set so high that no human being could have reached them without paying a price. And Elvis paid for it. He showed up. He always showed up. Even on nights when the person walking onto that stage was running on something closer to will than the energy, he gave the audience what they came for. That was the thing about him. He could not bring himself to disappoint people. It was not professional. It was something older and more personal than that. It was the way he was made, but even the strongest materials bend under enough pressure. Even the most generous spirit reaches a point where giving begins to feel like bleeding. Rest, when it came, offered less than it should have. He would step away from the schedule for a day or a week, and instead of refilling, he would sit inside the quiet and feel the weight of everything that was waiting for him on the other side of it. The break was never long enough to undo what the work had done, and the work always came back. The people around Elvis were, in their own ways, trying. Some of them loved him plainly and without condition. Old friends, family, people who had known him before the name meant anything, and who still saw the person underneath it. These were the ones who worried in the dark, who watched him carefully and said things in private to each other that they did not yet know how to say to him. Others were there because of what he represented. The career, the money, the proximity to something enormous. They were not bad people, most of them. They simply had interests that did not always line up with his well-being, and in the space between their interests and his, things sometimes got missed. And then there were those caught somewhere in the middle. People who cared genuinely, but did not have the tools or the understanding to reach him where he actually was. They could see that something was shifting in him. They could feel the distance growing, but the language for what they were seeing did not yet exist in their world. And so, they did what people do when they cannot name something. They waited and hoped it would pass. "I know when something's wrong," someone close to him said years later, in a voice still carrying the weight of it. "I just didn't know what to do about it." That gap between seeing and knowing what to do is where a great deal of the trouble lived. The footage from inside his private life during this period is quiet and strange. Not dramatic, not the kind of thing that announces itself as important while you are watching it. But look carefully, and it is all there. A heaviness in the eyes that was not there before. Long silences in the middle of conversations, as though he had gone somewhere else and left the rest of himself sitting in the chair. A kind of flatness that settled over him in unguarded moments. Not sadness exactly, but an absence of the lightness that used to come so naturally to him. He was tired in a way that sleep could not fix. That is a particular kind of tired, and it is one of the most serious kinds. It lives not in the muscles or the bones, but somewhere deeper, in the part of a person that generates the energy to want things, to feel things, to move toward the day with some sense of purpose. He kept going, that must be said. He did not stop. But the cost of continuing was rising in ways that no one around him was fully equipped to measure. The body, too, was beginning to speak. Years of performing, the physicality of it, the hours, the travel, the schedule that treated sleep as optional and rest as weakness, had accumulated into something that could no longer be quietly managed. His health was shifting in ways that the people around him noticed and mostly explained away, because explaining things away was easier than confronting what the explanations were covering. He had not been well for some time, not in the way that shows up obviously, with a clear diagnosis and a clear path forward, but in the slow, accumulating way that bodies register what minds are not allowed to acknowledge, through weight changes, through pain, through the systems of the body beginning to strain under conditions they were never designed to sustain indefinitely. He pushed himself harder than anyone I ever saw, someone from those years would later say, and he never once complained about it. That was true, he did not complain. But the body does not need permission to send its signals. It sends them regardless, quietly at first, then with more urgency, until the signals become impossible to ignore. The question that haunts the story of those years is not whether the signs were there. They were there. The question is what stood between the people who saw them and the understanding of how serious they truly were. Whether it was the limits of the time, the culture around him, or simply the very human difficulty of accepting that someone you love might be in real trouble. The answer is probably all of it at once. The day the music went quiet. He was the kind of person who made ordinary moments feel warm, not because he tried to. That was the thing. It was never performed. It was just him. If you were in a room with Elvis Presley and something made him laugh, truly laugh, the sound of it could change the temperature of the whole space. People leaned in. People smiled without meaning to. There was something in him that reached out to whatever was human in the people around him and recognized it, and that recognition felt like a gift. He was also, in his quietest moments, a deeply thoughtful man. He read. He asked questions that surprised people with their depth. He prayed, privately and sincerely, not for the cameras or the image, but because faith was something he had carried since childhood and never set down. He loved his daughter with a fierceness that people who witnessed it said was unlike anything else they ever saw in him. And this was a man capable of extraordinary feeling. Those who knew him in the final chapter of his life hold two truths at once. The first is that he was struggling. The second is that he was still, underneath everything, entirely himself. Still kind, still curious, still capable of making the person next to him feel seen. That is the version of Elvis Presley that the people who loved him carry. Not the image, not the icon, but the man who was gentle in ways the world never fully got to see. August 16, 1977, began the way most days at Graceland did. There was no announcement in the air, no sign written across the sky. The morning arrived the way mornings do, without warning, without ceremony, carrying nothing on its surface that distinguished it from any other day. The house settled into its routines. People moved through their tasks. The hours passed in that particular rhythm that Graceland had, unhurried, self-contained, removed from the noise of the outside world by the gates and the grounds and the quiet that collected there. Elvis had been up through the night. That was not unusual in those years. Sleep had become unreliable, something that came and went on its own terms, indifferent to what his body needed. He had spent the early hours reading, as he often did when rest would not come. Around 9 in the morning, he spoke to someone close to him. A brief exchange, nothing remarkable, the kind of conversation that would have dissolved into the background of any other day. "I'm just going to read for a while," he said, and went to his room. It was the last time most of them heard his voice. There are moments from that final day that the people who were there have turned over in their minds 1,000 times since. Small things, the kind of things you do not catalog while they are happening, because there is no reason to, because you do not yet know that you are living inside a moment you will spend the rest of your life trying to fully remember, the way he looked when someone last saw him in the hallway. Whether his eyes seemed more tired than usual, or whether that is only how memory has colored it since. A gesture, a word, a pause that in the ordinary hours of an ordinary day would have meant nothing. Those who loved him watched and worried, but said little. partly because he was Elvis, and you did not easily sit down with Elvis Presley and tell him you were frightened for him, but that now, viewed from the other side of what happened, seems to carry a weight it could not possibly have carried at the time. The unseen footage from Graceland captures some of this, not dramatically. It does not look, on its surface, like the footage of a final day. It looks like life inside a house, ordinary in the specific way that very unusual lives can sometimes appear ordinary from the inside. But there is something in the edges of it, a stillness, the particular quiet of a day that does not yet know what it is. Those who study it carefully have said the same thing. There was nothing in those hours that announced what was coming, and that is perhaps the most devastating part of it. It was Ginger Alden who found him. She had woken to find him gone from bed, not unusual given his patterns, and after some time, went to check on him. She found him on the bathroom floor. The attempts to reach him, to rouse him, to reverse whatever had happened were immediate and desperate. An ambulance was called. People move fast with the focused, terrified energy of those who are trying to outrun something they already sense they cannot outrun. He was taken to Baptist Memorial Hospital in Memphis. The team there worked on him. They worked hard. But the damage was too deep, had been building too long, and no amount of urgency in that room could undo what the years had quietly assembled inside him. At 3:30 in the afternoon, Elvis Presley was pronounced dead. He was 42 years old. The news moved through the world like a physical thing. People heard it in different ways. On the radio, on television, from a neighbor who came to the door with a face that said something had happened before the words did. And in every case, in every city and country and language, the reaction was the same in its core: disbelief. The clean, total disbelief of hearing something that the mind refuses to assemble into meaning. Because Elvis did not feel like someone who could die. That is the only honest way to say it. He had been so large, so constant, so woven into the fabric of ordinary life for so many people, that the idea of his absence was simply not a shape the world knew how to hold. People wept openly in the streets of Memphis. Fans gathered outside Graceland without anyone organizing them, pulled there by something instinctive, the way people move toward each other when something too large to carry alone has happened. They brought flowers, they brought candles, they stood together in the summer heat, and they cried, many of them for a man they had never met and yet somehow felt they had always known. "It's like losing a member of the family," one woman said through tears, standing outside the gates. She had driven hours to be there. She could not have explained exactly why, except that staying home had felt impossible. That was the nature of what Elvis had been to people. Not just an entertainer, not just a voice on a record or a figure on a stage. Something more personal than that. Something that had found its way into the private rooms of millions of lives and stayed there, quiet and present, the way beloved things do. The tributes came from everywhere. Musicians, presidents, ordinary people who had no platform and no audience, but who needed to say out loud that something real had been lost. Radio stations played his music for hours without interruption. Record stores ran out of albums within days. The world, it seemed, was reaching for him in the only way it still could. What the grief revealed more than anything was the size of the space he had occupied. You do not know the dimensions of a presence until it is gone. You do not know how much of the air in a room a person takes up, until you walk in one day and the room is the same, but something essential has left it. That is what August 16th of 1977 showed the world. Not just that Elvis Presley had passed away, but how deeply, how quietly, how completely he had been a part of things. He had started with nothing. A small boy from Mississippi with a voice that didn't belong to any one category and a heart that was too big and too open for its own good. And somehow, through the music and the work and the simple fact of being exactly who he was, he had become something the world could not imagine being without. Even now, the question carries weight. Not the question of what was lost, because the answer to that is beyond measuring, but the question of whether the people around him, the world around him, understood in time what he was quietly carrying, whether the signs that his body and spirit were sending were read clearly, or whether they were lost in the noise of everything he was expected to be. That question does not have a comfortable answer. It never has. What it has, instead, is the image of a man who gave more than he was ever asked to account for, and who deserved, in the end, to be more fully seen while he was still there to be seen. what the camera finally caught. There are people in this world who carry their pain so quietly that the people standing closest to them never hear a sound. Elvis Presley was one of those people. He had grown up learning, the way poor children often do, that your troubles were your own business, that you did not put them on display, did not ask others to carry what you yourself were struggling to lift. That lesson stayed with him long after the poverty was gone, long after the name meant something, long after there was no practical reason left to keep things close to the chest. He was private about the hard things, but he was open, genuinely, warmly open, about everything else, about his love for his daughter, about his faith, about the music that had never stopped moving him, the way it moved him the very first time he heard it as a boy. People who spent real time with him remembered not the icon, but the man who sat across from you and made you feel, for as long as the conversation lasted, that nothing else was more important to him than what you were saying. That man, the real one underneath all of it, is who the footage finally shows. When the private recordings from his final years began to surface, they did not look the way most people expected. There was no spectacle in them, no performance. What they contained was something quieter, and because of that, much harder to watch. They showed Elvis in unguarded moments, sitting alone, moving slowly through the rooms of his life with a heaviness that the stage version of him had always managed to conceal. There were flickers in them of the man everyone recognized, a sudden smile, a joke, a moment where the warmth broke through, and you could see exactly who he had always been. But around those flickers was something else, a tiredness that went beyond the physical, a look in his eyes in certain frames that spoke of a person carrying something heavy and carrying it entirely alone. He never wanted anyone to worry about him, someone who knew him well said, years after. Yeah, that was just how he was. And so, nobody fully did, or at least, nobody understood in time how much there was to worry about. To look back now at the full shape of his life is to see something that was invisible while it was happening. The pressure had never stopped. Not from the beginning. From the moment the world decided who he was, what he represented, what he owed, what he was expected to deliver, the weight had been building, and he had carried it with a grace that made it look effortless, which meant that no one felt the urgency to help him set it down. The loneliness inside that life was real. Fame is a strange and specific kind of isolation. It fills every room you enter while somehow leaving you more alone than you were before. The people are always there, around him, near him, attending to the details of his existence. But the particular loneliness that had settled into Elvis in his later years was not the kind that more people could fix. It came from somewhere deeper, from the distance between who the world needed him to be and who he actually was when the lights were off and the house was quiet. He had never fully closed that distance, and in the end, it had cost him everything. But here is what is also true, and what must not be lost in the sadness of how it ended. The music remains, not as a historical artifact, not as nostalgia, but as something living, still capable of reaching into a person and finding something real there. Generations who were not born when he walked onto a stage for the first time have found their way to his voice and felt what every generation before them felt, that this was someone who meant it. Every note, every word, he meant it. That does not happen by accident. It does not happen because of image or marketing or the machinery of fame. It happens because the person at the center of it was genuinely deeply human, full of feeling, full of contradiction, full of the kind of specific and unrepeatable life that great art always comes from. Elvis Presley was not a symbol first. He was a person first. And the world, for all its love of him, sometimes forgot that. The footage reminds us. Those unguarded frames, the ones never meant for any audience, they give back the person that the icon had slowly covered over. A man who felt too much and just too little of it. A man who gave the world his voice and his energy and his time and asked for almost nothing in return, except perhaps to be seen as something more than what the posters said he was. In the end, did the world truly understand him? Probably not. Not completely, not in the way he deserved. But those who look carefully at what he left behind, not just the records and the films, but the quiet evidence of how he lived, how he treated people, how he loved, those people get closer to it. They see a man worth knowing, a man worth mourning not as a legend, but as a human being whose life mattered and whose loss, even now, leaves something genuinely unfilled. That is the final reflection. Not the crown, not the stage, not the mythology. Just a man from Mississippi who felt things deeply, gave generously, and deserved more tenderness than the world knew how to give him while he was still here to receive it.